Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the last video, we discussed about what is rigid body and colliders. In this video, we will learn how to get inputs from the controller. So what do I mean by that? If you have a Quest or Quest 2, Quest 3 headsets, or if you have Vive Focus 3 or the Vive XR Elite headset, so you have got controllers, right? So those controllers have different type of buttons. So let's get familiar with the naming of the buttons. So this is the trigger button. You can press the buttons with your index finger. So these are the grip button. This is primary and this is secondary, and the third one is the joystick or the touchpad buttons. Okay, similarly, if you have the normal Vive controllers, which are not Android based devices, these are the outside in tracking system devices which require the base stations. So they are also kind of follow the same architecture, but there are some buttons missing. So they have the trigger button, the grip button, the primary button, and the joystick or touchpad button, but they do not have the secondary button. The secondary buttons are only existing in the Quest controllers or the Vive Focus 3 or XR Elite 2 controllers, like the Android based devices controllers. Okay, so how can we get inputs from these buttons and then we can register these inputs in our game? Let's find out. Okay, so now we are in our project. So now if we want to get inputs from the controllers, first of all we need to create input actions. So go to assets and then right click on it, create, and then the last option will be input actions. Okay, so create that, give a name, something like input actions. Okay, now double click on it to open it. Now you will see three different columns over here. You can turn on autosave. By doing that, whatever you will do, it will be automatically saved for you. So actions are some the actions that you are going to perform. Like let's say you click on the primary button, what will happen? You click on the secondary button, what will happen? You click on the trigger button and hold it for some time, what will happen? Those type of stuff. Action maps is like a collection of actions. So in our case, what will happen? We have lots of actions mapped to the right controller and left controller, right? So let's create an action map called left controller, and similarly we can create another action map called right controller. Okay, so now whenever you create an action map, Unity will by default create an action for you, name called new action. You can definitely change the action name by clicking on that, and then you can change it to, let's say, trigger, or let's say primary. Okay, so that means we are going to create the primary button action. Okay, similarly, if you want to create secondary button, you can create like secondary, something like that. Okay, so now by default it will also give you a option called no binding. Okay, so we need to understand what are the action properties first. So if you click on the primary, in the action properties you will see the action type, and there is a drop down and there are three options called value, button, pass through. By default the action type will be selected button for you. Okay, so button means these type of buttons where you will be only able to press the button once. Okay, so that means the A button, B button, X and Y, the primary and secondary buttons, you can just simply press the button once, and then whatever you need to do, you can do it by the button one press. Okay, but here you see the grip button or the trigger buttons, you can press and hold the button for a quite long time. You can half press the buttons. Okay, you can like slightly press the button, or you can simply touch the button and then something can happen, because these are touch sensitive and press sensitive, right? But these buttons are just only one click. If you touch that, maybe it will not do something, but you only need to press the button once and then something will happen in your game. Okay, so that's why there are two types of buttons. One is like simply clickable, only one clickable, and then the other type is like you can click and hold and then you can half press the button. So how to get that? So come back to our input action. So the primary, by default it will be selected for button. So button means the one clickable button. If you want to get how much the button is pressed, okay, so then you need to go to value, and then from value you can choose two different options out of that. Okay, so instead of going to secondary, let's delete that, and then let's say we can go with grip button. Okay, so now as I said, let's go back. So grip button, you can press and hold the button, right? So that means that you can understand like how much the button is pressed. If you want to get that type of thing, so let's go to grip, change the button to value, and then control type will be axis, because this can be pressed inside or outside. So that means it is going one axis direction. Okay, so either inside or outside. So now because this is a value, you can get a variable how much the button is pressed, but you cannot get that for primary. Why? Because by default the primary will be set for button. So button means you are either pressed or not pressed. Okay, there are joystick also, so we can go and see what we can do later. And then the primary button is set to button, but it says no binding. So that means we need to bind the button, the exact button that we want to use. Okay, so now go to no binding, and then it says path. So click on that, and then come down to XR controller. You go to this expandable icon, click on that, and this is left controller. So go to XR left hand controller, go there, go to optional control, and then here it says primary button. Okay, you can get secondary button also if you want the grip button. So that means you either press the button completely inside or outside. If you want to do that, then the grip button is there. Okay, so what we are doing, primary button. So let's go to primary button, and then you can see the primary button is mapped to the primary action for the left controller. You can do the same thing for the right controller also, but for now we are leaving it for sake of time. For grip button, we can do the same thing. Go to no binding, you can go to path, and then optional controls, and then you can go to grip, and then you see this option which is like one directional axis option, right? So but if you want to go for grip button, here is the grip button. The grip pressed and grip button is basically same. Okay, so that means this will be acting as a button. You either click the grip button completely inside, or you just do not press the button. But right now we want to know how much the grip button is pressed, so that's why this option, the 1D axis, is we are going to use. So now you see the grip button is there for the left hand controller, and we can auto save it, so that's why it is auto saved for us. Now I have said so much amount of things about the input actions till now, but Unity has done a good job. So either you can create all of your own input actions for your game, or you can do one thing which is very simple, which I am going to use in this particular tutorial. Okay, so let's close this option, come back to Unity, and then let's delete the input actions. Delete it, and then if you go to your assets folder and samples, remember we downloaded the XR interaction toolkit earlier from the package manager, right? So from the package manager, XR interaction toolkit, and we also downloaded the samples, the starter asset sample, right? If you download that, you will get this XRI default input actions. If you open that, you will see you have got lots of action maps and actions already set up for you by Unity. So you do not have to create all these XR input actions by your hand. Okay, so now you can understand these are all the input actions for head, left hand, left hand interaction, locomotion, and all those stuff are there. So what we want to do is, let's say we want to create a cube, and just simply by pressing the primary button and secondary button, we want to change the color of the cube. Okay, so that means we are basically doing some interaction with the cube, right? So let's go with the left hand interaction. So here select is a button type of action, so expand it, and then you can see this is the grip button. So grip button is set for the select input action. Okay, then select value is the another grip, so that means it is the how much the grip is pressed, that you can know from this select value input action. Okay, Similarly, activate is the trigger button. Activate value is how much the trigger is pressed. Okay, UI press is again trigger button. UI press value is again how much the trigger is pressed for the UI. UI scroll is primary 2D axis. So primary 2D axis is the joystick. Okay, for the left hand controller, this is the left hand interaction. Right hand will be the right hand interaction. Rotate anchor is again the joystick for rotation. Translate anchor is for again the joystick for translation. Translation means movement, okay, of the how much movement you want to do for the game object. Scale is primary 2D axis click, so that means if you click the primary 2D axis, so the joystick, whatever the value will be, you can get that here. And scale delta is also primary 2D axis. Okay, but one thing you noticed here, there is nothing related to primary and secondary button, right? You see the grip buttons, the trigger buttons, the joystick buttons, but where is the primary and secondary? The thing is, as you have seen, that primary button and the secondary button are not universal for every controller, right? So for Android based devices like the MetaQuest devices or the Vive Focus 3 XR Elite 2 devices, they have the primary and secondary button. But if you see the Vive controllers, they only have the primary button but not the secondary button. Okay, so that's why Unity chose a universal way to provide that input action so that all the controllers will work properly. Now, because there is no primary and secondary buttons, so we can create the primary and secondary buttons inside these input actions for ourselves. Okay, so let's do that. It's simple, as I showed you earlier, primary and secondary. So primary is by default button type, and yes, we need the primary to be a button type of input actions. So go to no binding and then go to XR controller left hand, optional controls, primary button. Yep, secondary is the same thing, is button type. Go to no binding, go to here, and then secondary button. And then this is the left hand controller. Make sure that those are left hand controller because we are doing the left hand interaction. Okay, similarly go to right hand, create primary and secondary. Okay, and then make sure these are button types. Okay, go to no binding, path, and then here XR controller. Go back to the XR controller and then click on XR controller. Remember, this is right hand because we are doing right hand here. So XR controller, optional controls, and then primary button. This is for primary, and then right hand XR controller, no binding, secondary button, and then secondary button. And I have selected autosave, so that means everything will be saved for me. So now you can see that both for left hand interaction and right hand interaction, we have got primary and secondary buttons input actions. Okay, so now we have got input actions ready for us, but how can we get those input actions in real time? For that we need a script. Okay, so now we are going to write our first script so that you can understand what is going to happen. Okay, so now let's create a simple cube. Okay, and then add a new script called input taker, something like that. Okay, so now let it load for some time. Okay, so now as you can see, under this cube the input taker is added. Now where you can find this input taker in your assets folder, so let's go here and then you can see input taker over here. So let's make a script folder. Remember, if you have seen my earlier videos, hopefully I think in my first video I create a scripts folder, so I put the input taker in the scripts folder so that everything looks good. Okay, so let it load, and then after that when it is load properly, then go to int cube and then open the input taker by double clicking on here. So by double clicking on here, so remember, you need to have a code editor in order to run properly your code, right? So I have the Visual Studio Code. If you have a Mac, you have to use the Visual Studio Code. If you have a Windows, you have a choice of Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio. But if you have a Mac, you do not have any choice. You have to use Visual Studio Code. And if you need to know how to install the Visual Studio Code and set up properly with your Unity project, please go ahead and see my earlier videos. I will put the link in the I section. Okay, So now let's start the coding. It will not be a huge code, it's just a simple code. So because this is inputs, we are getting inputs from the controller, so we need to invoke the namespace first, which is called Unity Engine dot input system. So this namespace will invoke all the necessary input actions in our code. Okay, so now we go to line number 7 and then we write public input action property, then left primary button and right primary button. Okay, so now what it is doing here is that we are creating a public variable of input action property, which is left primary button and right primary button. Okay, so what is the difference between public and private? Okay, let's do that. So if you create a public variable and then I automatically save it, so that means if you go to file and then auto save it, so everything will be saved for you. If you go back to Unity and then remember we have created a public variable of input action property, so go over here and then let the Unity load, and then once it is load, you see the input action. There is a left primary button and then right primary button, and then you can do some stuff to incorporate which is the left primary button and right primary button, right? But if you go here and then change it to private, okay, and then come back over here, you will not be able to see the left primary button, right primary button, right? But we need the left primary button, right primary button from our input actions, right? So remember we created the primary input actions and the secondary input actions. We need to assign those actions to our script so that the script can understand what the input actions are, right? So that's why we need to make sure the input actions are public. So you can sort of understand, I hope, that what is the difference between public and private. So public variables can be accessed through the Unity editor and from other scripts also, but private variables are only accessible within this script. Okay, now let's create another private variable called private color. So this is a color variable called cube color. What it will do is it will take the color of the cube. So this dot get component mesh renderer dot material dot color. So what we are doing is we are taking this dot component. So go back once again. So remember the input taker is assigned to the cube game object. Always remember that if you create a script under the assets folder and write something in the script, okay, so for example I created the input taker script inside the scripts folder and then I started writing some script, it will not work unless you attach the script to a game object. It will not work. Okay, so where I attach the input taker script to the cube game object. Okay, what I want to do is I want to change the cube color. So that's why this means the cube. Okay, because this script is attached to the cube game object, so that's why I want to access the material of the cube. So this dot mesh renderer get component mesh renderer means the mesh renderer. I am wanting to access the cube's mesh renderer. Okay, and then what I want to change the color of the material of the mesh renderer. Okay, so that's how you write. So this dot get component mesh renderer dot material, so dot material and the color of that material. Okay, so expand that, this is the color of the material. Okay, fine. So this is the start function. So whenever you will hit the play button either inside the Unity editor or inside your game, you want to make sure that the cube color will be filled up with this value at the beginning frame. Okay, so now inside the update method, what you want to do is we want to get the inputs from the buttons, primary and secondary button, right? So let's do that. So we create a bool variable. Bool means boolean variable. Remember we are dealing with a button. So button means either it is pressed or not pressed. So that means either 0 or not 1. Okay, so that's why it is a Boolean variable. So L primary activated equals to left primary button dot action dot is pressed. Okay, so I created a Boolean variable called left primary activated, and then what I am trying to see is left primary button is pressed or not, and then you see it is a Boolean return value. So that's why we created a Boolean variable, and whatever the value of the is pressed or not, after checking, it will be assigned to this L primary activated variable. Similarly, we can go for right primary activated equals to right primary button dot action dot is pressed. Okay, I forgot to mention earlier that we also going to use the left secondary button and right secondary button. Okay, so we can just simply copy paste this here, and then instead of primary we can go for secondary, and then again copy paste that. Okay, so now in our update methods, we have got whether the primary button is pressed or the secondary button is pressed for either hands, right? So now once we get that, we can just do one thing. We can check like if the buttons are pressed. So if L primary activated or right primary activated. So this is the OR function, either the left primary activated or the right primary activated. If both the buttons are pressed at the same time, you can choose AND function. So that means the left primary and the right primary both are activated, but we do not want that. We just want to check if either of them are pressed or not. Okay, so what we can do is we want to change the color of the cube. So again, this dot get component mesh renderer dot material dot color equals to, let's say I want to change the color to yellow. Okay, similarly, else if left secondary activated or right secondary activated, then I want to change the color of the cube to a different color. This dot get component mesh renderer dot material dot color, make sure there is no space here, and let's say this is color dot black. I want to change the color to black. Okay, and then when neither of these buttons are pressed, we want to make sure the color of the cube is the same color which was there in the first place, like in the start method. So we can go to else, then we can go for this dot get component mesh renderer dot material dot color equals to cube color. Fine. So what we did, we took the cube color at the beginning of the game, then based on the primary and secondary button pressed or not, we are changing the color of the cube. Okay, so this is the overall script. Now come back to Unity, let the script load, and then we can do our stuff. Okay, so it is loaded. Now click on the cube, make sure the position is reset, so that means you can see what is happening. So let's put a little bit here so that you can see what is happening. Okay, like it's over here. Fine, and then inside the input taker, left primary button, right primary button, left secondary button, click on that, right secondary button, click on that. Now all of them needs the input action, so we can go to click here, click this small icon, click on that, and then we can search for primary, and then this is the left primary, so click on left primary, and then again primary. This is the right hand, so right hand primary. So left secondary, so click on secondary, and this is left hand secondary, and finally secondary, right hand secondary. So our script knows which are the input actions and our script is set up properly. So now let's build the game and then see what happens. Okay, so save the scene, now build the game. Okay, now you can see that I am in the environment, and as you can see, so this is the cube. Okay, so this is my right hand, this is my left hand. If I press the right primary button, as you can see, the color has changed to yellow. If I press the left primary button, same yellow. If I press the left secondary button, black, and right secondary button, black. And then when I release all the buttons, it comes back to the normal color of the cube. Okay. If you want to learn more about the input system, like the very nitty-gritty details, like how the input actions are generated, what are the other options that you can play with. So remember, the input actions that we created over here is just like very preliminary things, like primary button, and then the primary button we assigned, right? But there are other options, interaction, processes, and all those stuff. Some of the preset input actions are already set up for us. For example, like the primary 2D axis, these are already set up by Unity for us. So if you want to learn more about this, please go ahead and then go to this website. I will put the link in the description section below. Okay. So in the next video, we will talk about how to get inputs from the trigger, grip, and the joysticks. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this video. So see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.